Today, we are discussing Google's massive search documentation leak and talk about what that means for your SEO and content strategy.
Google search is still a very big part of our ecosystem in digital marketing. And so it's really interesting to have a look at what this massive search documentation leak is all about, and then talk about how that sits with our framework. How does that affect your demand generation strategy? How does that affect your B2B marketing strategy?
Welcome to the B2B Playbook. We built this channel for small B2B marketing teams who want to drive more revenue for their business. Every week, we're showing you how to create more demand for your brand step by step using our 5Bs framework. So if you're time poor, resource strapped, but you still want to make a big impact on your business, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button down below so you don't miss an episode. Welcome back to the B2B Playbook. Today, we are discussing Google's massive search documentation leak and talk about what that means for your SEO and content strategy. We're into season 6 of the show. We spent seasons 1 to 5 giving away our 5Bs framework for demand generation, releasing it step by step. Please go back to these and listen to them if you haven't already. Kevin, could you quickly tell our listeners, if they haven't been tuning in, what we covered in seasons 1 to 5 and what our 5Bs framework for demand generation is all about?
Sure thing, George. So the first 5 seasons, we covered each of the 5Bs of our framework, the 5Bs framework. In that process, we went through be ready, be helpful, be seen, be better, and be the best. And effectively, that took you through the process of how to deeply understand your dream customers, how to then build helpful content for those dream customers so that you're then developing relationships of trust with them online. Then we looked at how to amplify those efforts and be seen, and then how to optimize your whole process and be better. And finally, how to take some of those advanced strategies from the big end of town into your own practices as well. And in this season, we've been talking about things like the questions we get in demand generation. And I think this week we're taking a slight change of pace. We're looking at something that's a little bit more topical. It's been out for a few months now, but we thought it's still a good time to address this because Google search is still a very big part of our ecosystem in digital marketing. And so it's really interesting to have a look at what this massive search documentation leak is all about, and then talk about how that sits with our framework. How does that affect your demand generation strategy? How does that affect your B2B marketing strategy? And because our framework is so much based on content, on helpful content, how does that sit in with what signals Google is looking at and how that can help your SEO and content strategy as well? So that's what we're talking about today.
Yeah, so Kev, as you said, this leak originally happened back in May, a couple of months ago. It exposed over 14,000 potential ranking features, and it gives us really a big look under the hood at Google's normally closely guarded search ranking system. This information, when it was leaked, was sent to Rand Fishkin. Rand is the founder of SparkToro. He previously founded Moz, which is a very large SEO, originally consultancy and then software product. We actually had Rand on the podcast probably nearly 100 episodes ago or so now, Kevin. Time flies. And he is now leading his company, SparkToro. And Rand published this information with his analysis. So we've got a couple of articles that we're going to pull up if you are watching on YouTube, and we want to talk through some of those key points and just try and make it as digestible and as actionable for you B2B marketers as possible.
And as George said, we are going to go through Rand's article. We're also going to go through this one as well, because we think both of those, particularly in the summary sections, really give a great highlight as to what the key takeaways are for this particular leak. Of course, there's a lot of technical detail that these articles also go through, certainly a little beyond our technical expertise when it comes to SEO. So we encourage you to check out these articles if SEO is your kettle of fish and you want to dive into the technical details. I will also call out that I did see Mike King and Danny Goodwin's session on this material on SMX Advanced as well. If you haven't already, also check that out in video format. It's a lot easier to digest. And particularly, they address a lot of the questions that they crowdsourced from those attendees at that virtual conference. Another great way to digest this information. But we're going to give it a crack today to give our own version of that and to look at the key takeaways from this massive leak. So, George, if you don't mind taking us to the end of this article, I think it's best to start at the end. Someone's done all the hard work for us in figuring out exactly what the technical things mean. And they've summarized it in a very good generalized formula right at the end.
That's it, Kev. We've always been a fan of work smarter, not harder. If someone else has done some heavy lifting for us, let's use that as a kicking off point. Okay, I've scrolled down for those of you who are listening. Kev, there's what looks to be a very complicated formula now that I've got up on the page. Is that what you wanted me to look at?
And actually, a little further down, George, but again, for our technical SEO people on the show or listening in on the show, make sure to check the article out for more details. But I think it's worth just looking at this final formula that's called the generalized formula here. And they really talk about the main factors that are involved that really go into Google's ranking algorithm and the factors that they really look at. So let's go through each of these elements in the generalized formula. It looks like at first Google looks at things like user interaction scores, content quality, and link scores. And then they multiply that by relevance boost, quality boost, and they add it on to the content specific score adjustments. So, what does all these things mean? User interaction scores generally talk about things like what are Google's signals for when a user finds a particular piece of content and what do they do with that information? So potentially it's looking at things like how do they navigate your website, how do they get to your website, and how do they then engage with the content on there. As you can imagine, if a user is to interact in a positive way or a way that Google sees is going to be positive, then hopefully that information is helpful. They're reading it, they're scrolling through the majority of that piece of content. Potentially there's different formats of that content on there. Maybe there's some video, maybe there's some interactive graphs, and generally the users are clicking and navigating through the different media formats and engaging with different pieces of content. So presumably that is what goes into the user interaction scores. And then the content quality score, probably a bit more self-explanatory, looking at how good is that content. Do people really find value in it? And again, Google has certain signals to determine the content quality. And also the add-on link scores, something that we don't specifically talk about a lot, but links are still very important. Who's linking to your content? Where you're linking out? Internally, how you're linking between your helpful pieces of content. All these things Google look at to figure out exactly how important a piece of content is. And importantly, when they discuss this in the documentation and the various articles we're talking about today, they also talk about Google mentioning that the amount of traffic that goes through a particular link is also important. So it's not just about link building in the traditional sense that SEO might think about, where we attach it to a particular anchor link and that's it. It really should be a link that is actually helpful to users, and users are actually clicking through and navigating through and following through and using. The amount of traffic that generates is obviously another signal that Google has been looking at according to these documentations that have been leaked. And then when we look at what they multiply that by, so those are all the signals that suggest a piece of content is helpful. What they multiply that by is relevance boost and quality boost. So they actually look at things like, okay, there's specific entities, websites, brands, even authors within Google's way of seeing the world, of seeing the search engine world. How do they then help to rank different pages? If a same piece of content seems to have similar user interaction, similar content quality, they then actually look at how relevant is that particular piece of content to a specific search. So the topic, the relevance to that particular topic is now starting to come in as a factor as well. And again, quality is still important here, but it takes into account that there's potential borders around a particular topic or piece of content. So really relevance is very important when you're looking at the content that you want to create. You want to create it in an area where you have subject matter expertise, or you have someone who has brought that subject matter expertise in. So something that we always talk about, you have to have that expert and quality in your content, but then you have to stick to that topic and you have to be relevant within that particular area. And then they look at content specific score adjustments, still more signals again to figure out exactly where that piece of content sits, what topics does it relate to, and is it an area of expertise that your particular brand or your particular website entity is known for. So that is quite interesting to look at what basically the factors that all these leaks have finally distilled it down to. At least that's what Search Engine Land thinks, and I'd like to say they're pretty reputable in the space. given they've built their reputation on SEO related content. So again, listeners, if you want to go through the details, certainly go through and have a look. But certainly we can pull out some of the important factors that they see from this leak from Google is that Google search is actually looking at things like how helpful is a user finding your particular piece of content? How relevant is it? Does it have subject matter expertise? And all those things then go into figuring out how good a quality that piece of content is and where does it sit within a particular topic. So these are probably the things that you should keep in mind when you create your content as well. It really comes back to a lot of things that we've been saying. Get your subject matter expertise in your content, build helpful content that is actually helpful to your intended audience or your dream customers. Make sure that goes beyond just having the content there, actually present it in a way where they're naturally navigating that. Whether that's socials, whether that's in a particular piece of content, and what form that content takes should be dictated again by those dream customers and what they prefer. Because if you're building content that they prefer in the format that they prefer, they're more likely to engage with it. And that's further signals to Google to surface that content a lot higher in the results.
So, Kevin, it seems as though these behavioral elements that Google is looking at are almost being taken into account more and more. Meaning, as you said, like how are people actually interacting with that web page? How much traffic is going to it? And of that traffic, how much are engaging with the assets on that page? How far are they scrolling down? Are they clicking to other links? Are they mimicking the behavior of someone who is actually getting a lot out of that content? Because remember, listeners and viewers, that is Google's ultimate goal, is to try and rank these pages based on what they think is going to be most helpful, matched to that query that person has searched. And as they get more and more sophisticated, they've been doing it for so many years, they keep adding in more and more factors. And since they're able to measure everyone's activity in Chrome, if you use Google Chrome, they can measure exactly how you're using that website within Chrome. And so if you go to a website and if you go to a web page, if you go to the page that accompanies this episode, Kevin, and there will be one because we do one for every episode, if we get thousands of people go to that web page and people barely scroll down past 20% of it, guess what? Google's probably not going to think that it's really worth sharing that much or going to be worth ranking that much higher. So it always comes back down to quality of experience. And that's a really, really important factor.
I think, George, it's also worth just going back up to where you were looking at the 9 pieces of actionable advice to consider in this particular article as well. So we've talked about generally what the takeaway should be based on the formula, that generalized formula we just talked through. And it all really centers back in on helpful content, expert content, but in a format that your users will enjoy, will appreciate. These 9 pieces of actionable advice take that a little step further. So there's other factors you can look at on your website, on how you host your content to make it even more appealing to Google as well as your users. So let's go through some of these really quickly. You should invest. The first one there is you should invest in a well-designed website with intuitive architecture so you can optimize for nav boost. And effectively, nav boost is Google's way or algorithm or set of factors that look at how users navigate to a particular website. How did they find it in the first place? How far did they go in the search results to get to a particular result to then click through it? And then once they've landed on that page, how do they navigate through that page? Is it easy, intuitive? Did users go back and forth too much? Or do they bounce from a particular page? All those things go into this nav boost idea. And so this is pretty logical. If a website is very easy to navigate, the users are finding it helpful, and that's showing up in Google signals for determining what that looks like, then that will obviously help that particular piece of content come up higher in the search results.
So, Kev, after you shared this article with me and I took a read, I started thinking about how can we do anything at our end to try and maximize our chances based on what we know about what Google prefers. And doing that with the B2B playbook, I thought we'd share that with the listeners so you can see, grounded in reality, how you should apply this to what you do. Kevin, we've been very recently trying to rank a page for our demand generation program. We want to rank for the keyword search demand generation course, gets 1,000 or so searches a month. We, of course, have the B2B incubator, which is our demand generation program. And so we created a page specifically for it. What I realized, Kevin, is that we actually didn't link out to that in our navigation menu at all. And so it was hard to find that page. We started doing some interlinking from some of our main pages and especially from our mini series we did on Demand Gen. But one of the biggest things I think that Google probably looks at is your actual navigation menu, because that's the primary way people are going to use to navigate around your website. So what we do is we tidied up our headers a little bit more, and I actually did this today. And I created a menu item called courses, and now a sub menu which says demand generation course, which if you click to it, takes you straight to the page that we're trying to rank. Kevin, do you think that's what they were getting at there? Do you think that would fall within trying to optimize for nav boost? What do you think? Have I missed the mark?
Time will tell, George. I think time will tell, as a lot of things in SEO tends to be. It's a lot of hypothesis and experimentation, but certainly it seems to make sense to me. It seems to relate to NavBoost, and certainly if it's of value ultimately at the end of the day for our website visitors and our users, then I think it will certainly become a positive factor. George, I think there's no need for us to go through every single one of these points, but another one that I wanted to call out is maybe the fourth from the bottom, where it says, while it's difficult to maintain high quality content and publishing frequency, there is a reward. Google is applying site level chart scores, which predict site/page quality based on your content. So Google measures variance in any way you can imagine. So consistency is key. And I think that last phrase is important. Consistency is key. It's something that we've talked about a lot on the show, and whether that's getting your content strategy in place and then making sure you have that scheduler in place so that you're consistently taking those steps to put out the helpful content that you need. Really, consistency is key. It's something we've seen play out again and again, whether that's in search results or in social media or even building our podcast following. Having that consistency is really important, because beyond the fact that Google's obviously taking that as a signal for how well you're putting content out there and how helpful you're being and how high that quality would be in terms of improving your existing content. If you think about it logically, users, your dream customers, your audience will expect consistency. And that is another factor beyond helpful content that helps to build that sense of trust and helps to build that following and helps to build trust within your user demographic, whatever that might be. And so if you're building that sense of trust, they're going to come back to you more and more to find your helpful content. And again, that is just a snowball effect. Consistency in putting out that content means consistency in return traffic, which means more consistent signals to Google that your site, your content is a very trustworthy one and is repeatable and worth ranking.
A great reminder, as you said, Kevin, to make sure that you've got a system for consistently publishing expert led content with original insights. If it's more expert led, it's going to be of higher value. It's going to be more original. It's going to be a better experience for users. Google's going to recognize all of that and it's going to reward you for it. But you need a system for doing that. You need a system for doing that. And that's effectively what Kevin and I have given you guys here at the B2B Playbook, especially in season 2. That's what we spoke about. We also show you exactly how to do it in our B2B Demand Gen program, the B2B Incubator. But it's effectively how Kevin and I have managed to every single week for nearly 140 episodes in a row released a 40-minute podcast, a 40-minute YouTube episode, 12 LinkedIn posts, an article that's really in depth, 8 to 10 YouTube shorts, and a newsletter. And we're able to do that really consistently in a really short amount of time because we have a system. And people who listen to the podcast and people who go through our program, they're able to create something very similar for their business. Probably not to the same frequency that we do it, Kevin. I think weekly is still ludicrous, the fact that we do this. But look, we're out here practicing what we preach and we want to show the most extreme version of it. So, yes, you need a system.
The final point that I want to address in these actionable advice points is entities are very important. So that's the second last one there. Salient scores for entities and top entity identification I mentioned. And I think Rand's article actually addresses this point a little better, talking about entities and how important they are. So maybe, George, let's jump across to Rand's article and we can again have a look at the last few points there. So, Georgian listeners, here's Rand's article on the same topic. And of course, he was the first one to really talk about this in so much depth. And then obviously, Search Engine Land also contributed a lot of content as well in the space since. But I think very pertinent to this discussion is Rand's takeaways in his article about this. So, the big takeaways for marketers who care about organic search traffic. And that first one there, brand matters more than anything else. And he talks about how Google has numerous ways to identify different entities and then sort and filter and rank them. And he defines entities to include things like brands, so that's brand names, official websites, associated social media accounts. And then also, actually, he goes on to say, seem to cover things like authors and authorities in the space as entities as well. And so, from that last article, entities is very important, and Rand's certainly of the same opinion. And what that really boils down to is that actually brand is very important. And I don't think there's a better way to put it than what Rand said there in the second paragraph. If there's one universal piece of advice he had for marketers seeking to broadly improve the organic search ranking and traffic, it would be to build a notable, popular, well recognized brand in your space outside of Google search. So that's very important. The focus isn't on ranking within Google search. Google search is trying to find pieces of content, brands, entities that users are signaling to it that these are the authorities in their particular space on a particular topic. But if you're already established as the authority in a particular topic, in a particular area, sooner or later, Google's going to figure that out based on users coming to your website, coming to your social media accounts, and interacting with your content. So that particular piece of advice, I think, is very important. Don't worry about Google search. Don't worry about creating content to rank in Google search just for the sake of it. Instead, focus on things like building that reputable brand. And how do we do that? We do it through helpful content. We do it through engaging with the wider industry that you're in, but making sure you stick to that particular industry. You pump out content that's helpful to that particular industry. And in doing so, establish yourself as a trusted and reputable subject matter expert and ultimately a trusted brand within your space. Because once you have that, then naturally Google will find that your particular entity, your particular brand entity is valuable through the user signals again, and it will start to rank your websites and your content higher and higher, including your social media accounts. So brand matters more than anything else. And I think that is very much the core of the 5Bs framework as well. We look to help you build your brand through content, through helpful content, and ultimately that brand does the heavy lifting. So you don't have to spend money trying to steal traffic away from your competitors, trying to scale through paid channels alone. You're building your helpful content, which is largely free, but you're sharing your subject matter expertise and therefore becoming that recognized expert in the industry. And therefore, your brand will naturally come up with that effort.
So write for your audience first, you write your customers, and Google second. There still are some things that you want to do to that content to make it as visible for Google as possible. Things like making sure that you do have some of those keywords in your headings so they can easily see that it's relevant, but don't do it to the detriment of the user. Like, the user experience is what it's leaning towards more and more, and that's really what's building your brand. And just Google's only going to get smarter and smarter at understanding what is a good piece of content versus what is a piece of content that's unoriginal and has been designed to try and manipulate Google's search rankings. It's only getting better at that. So write for the user first and Google second.
I think very much Rand's second point effectively compounds the first point. He ends that point by saying there's plenty of powerful brands that rank remarkably well in Google and have very little experience, expertise, authoritativeness, or trustworthiness. So EEAT, as the industry likes to say for short, it's been bandied about as the most important thing to focus on when you're building your content. But at the end of the day, Rand reckons, and certainly seems to be reflected in the documentation leaked from Google, that EEAT is important, but brand is potentially more important. So again, it comes back to building that reputable brand through content, through your users, and focusing on that effort outside of Google search.
Yeah, that's interesting, Kevin, that he says he's a bit worried that EEAT is 80% propaganda and 20% substance. And I think Part of Rand's point around all of this is Google comes out publicly and declares things like EEAT is a big factor that they look at when ranking a particular page. And of course, they want to feed that information to everyone out there because then they go, oh, there's no more games with Google. We've just got to write as high quality as possible. Rand is saying that's not necessarily always the case. But look, I think he's also making the point, Kevin, that unless you are a big established brand, it's very hard for you to play that game that Google is playing. And so the best thing that you can do is to really focus on high quality content that builds a great experience for your users that people are attracted to, not just on Google, but any place that information is distributed, be it socials, coming from newsletters, wherever it is.
Yes, and that's exactly what Rand's final takeaway is. So, down at number 5, he says that for most small and medium businesses and newer creators or publishers, SEO is likely to show poor returns until you've established credibility, navigational demand, and a strong reputation among a sizable audience. So, he's basically saying that SEO is a big brand, popular domains game. And as George said, a lot of those different things that you can do on the technical side when it comes to SEO, it's a big brands game. If you have that big brand, if you have that reputation already, and you have enough users coming to your website, then it's worth investing in the technical SEO side of things a little bit more and trying to get things moving a bit quicker on that side and a bigger scale. But when you're just starting out, it's not that you should ignore SEO, as Rand said. It's not that you should ignore it completely. You should get some of those basics down. And we talked about that with Sam Dunning as well in the episodes with him in the past. You should definitely do things like make sure your page title has the relevant keywords for your particular topic in there. You should make sure that things are indexable and you have those very basic fundamental things up on your website and set up right and in your titles and so on. But for the growth period of maybe a few years to come from there, you really need to be focusing in on your content, making sure that it's helpful, making sure that it's from subject matter expertise, so that it's actually going to be relevant for your dream customers, for your target audience. So then you can start to build that brand and build that reputation of trust. Because on that basis, then your SEO efforts on the technical side will be more worth it. There's little tricks that you can play along the way, but the stuff that's going to make the biggest gains is still to come from that building of your brand through helpful content.
And Kevin, I think it also makes a good case for starting more niche because there's those long tail searches out there that the big brands who typically would rank better for just aren't paying attention to. So if you are offering a service or a product within a particular industry or segment, if you niche down further, there's probably a smaller search volume for that particular thing that the big guys aren't really looking at. And that's exactly what we're doing here. We're talking all about B2B demand generation for small teams. And so a lot of the time, the search volume of searches that we're typically targeting are rarely more than 1,000 a month, and the competition is relatively weaker. And so when we go up there and we're competing against other people for search traffic, it's one around an area that we have deep expertise and it's all that we talk about is demand generation. We've been doing it now for over 2 years. And two, the big guns, the really big guys, they're not looking at this anywhere near as much. And so it provides an opportunity for us to take up that space and really match the intent behind that particular search. So if someone's really looking for something around B2B demand generation marketing, they think about the B2B playbook. But if someone's searching for something around B2B marketing more generally, they might look elsewhere. They might go to a big behemoth versus HubSpot. They're probably taking up every other search result for something more generic like that.
Yeah, 100%. And listeners, it's effectively a game of percentages, right? If you're looking at eating up 100 searches out of 200, then you're 50% of the market. So you're much more likely to be seen by Google as a reputable brand, a reputable entity within that particular space. But then if you broaden that niche out to say 1,000, now you only have 1/10 of the traffic in that particular niche. So obviously, if somebody else has 300, 400 clicks or visitors of that 1,000, then you're going to look like a much smaller player. So it's the idea of, fish in those smaller ponds first, make sure you dominate those markets, and be the big fish in the small pond, and then start to expand that pond over time as you grow as well. And then that will be your strategy going forward. But at the end of the day, if that's all too technical, if that's all too much, just think about it in this way. Focus in on your dream customers, on what content will be helpful to them, and that will naturally help you build that reputation if you're servicing that particular need.
Such a timeless lesson, Kevin, is, as you said, like niche down, become incredibly important and relevant to someone, no matter how small that pond is. That's going to create a great experience. You will be rewarded for that with traffic, with business that comes from that. And then you take that and you reinvest into moving to a bigger pond. And it's a much better way to approach it than the spray and pray, try and take on a huge market all at once and just not even make a tiny dent in it. Because guess what? You have a tiny fraction of the resources that your big incumbent competitor has.
George, that's the discussion around what that leak from Google means to our B2B marketing strategy and our content strategy and our SEO strategy. Certainly, it's great to validate and to verify all the things that we've been talking about with this leak from Google. It seems like the biggest search engine out there, very powerful space, is looking at the same things that we are focusing in on, and ultimately will lead to a great result for our listeners if they follow our framework. Key takeaways for this episode: SEO, or showing up in Google, is more about helpful content for your audience than people think. Google is just using different ways to determine what is actually helpful to a particular audience. Secondly, topic relevance and authority is also important, but so is brand. Remember that brand is actually probably the most important thing here, and it looks like it's here to stay for some time to come. So make sure you're building that helpful content to build your brand. And finally, be sure to stick to creating helpful content and use that to build your reputation and brand based on trust to win in Google and search engines as well as in general.
Beautiful. Okay. Thank you, Kevin. Listen, as always, you can find the links to everything that we discussed in the show notes. And Kevin and I are just so grateful that every week more and more marketers are tuning in every Monday to the B2B Playbook. If we could ask one thing, it would be to please pass the show to someone who you think would get value from it. Also, check us out on YouTube. We always have plenty of visuals to accompany every episode now. So make sure you check it out, subscribe, comment, do all those wonderful things to help this reach more people. Thank you so much, Kevin. Thank you so much, listeners and viewers. Take care and catch you next week.
Thank you, George. Thank you, viewers and listeners. Catch you all next week.